Ethan Miller had always believed that love was something that settled over time, like dust over furniture, quiet, predictable, and easy to forget. His marriage to Nathan had become exactly that, a collection of routines, carefully folded days that looked identical from one to the next. Morning coffee, brief conversations, an absent-minded kiss before work, and silence that stretched across the dinner table like a thin veil neither of them dared to lift. When Nathan left for a business trip that first week of June, the house felt larger than usual. The air was still, the quiet heavy. Ethan filled his evenings with half-hearted chores, rearranging shelves, watering plants that didn't need watering. That's when the message came: Marcus Carter, back in town, man. You around? It had been years since Ethan had seen Marcus. They'd met in college, two young men chasing impossible dreams, staying up until dawn debating music, life, and the kind of love they both thought they'd someday understand. Marcus had moved away after graduation, building a life filled with travel, new jobs, and brief mentions of relationships that never lasted. But his energy had always been magnetic, impossible to forget. Ethan stared at the message longer than he should have. Then he replied. Of course. Come by any time. The knock came that evening, low and confident. When Ethan opened the door, the years fell away in an instant. Marcus stood there with that same easy grin, his dark skin glowing under the porch light, eyes filled with a warmth Ethan hadn't felt from anyone in a long time. He smelled faintly of rain and travel, and when he hugged Ethan, it wasn't the polite kind of hug old friends give, it was grounding, familiar, and real. Man, it's been forever, Marcus said, stepping inside, his laughter echoing through the hallway. You haven't changed at all. Ethan smiled, though he knew he had. You have. You look settled. Different. Different good? Marcus teased. Ethan hesitated. Different, grown. They sat in the living room, a half-empty bottle of wine between them, stories spilling as easily as the drink. Marcus talked about his travels, Berlin, Cape Town, Sao Paulo, cities that seemed too alive to fit inside Ethan's quiet world. Ethan listened, drawn to every word, to the light in Marcus's eyes when he spoke. At one point, Marcus looked around and said, "It's a beautiful home. Feels calm." "It's quiet," Ethan corrected. "Too quiet sometimes." Marcus tilted his head. "Nathan still working crazy hours?" "Always." Ethan tried to sound casual, but his voice betrayed something hollow. Marcus didn't press. He just nodded slowly and poured more wine. "You deserve better conversations than spreadsheets and silence." Ethan laughed softly, trying to shake off the weight of that truth. "And you still talk like a poet, don't you?" Marcus leaned back, smiling. "Maybe I just see what others ignore." They talked until the sky outside deepened to indigo. The lamplight softened their faces, the distance between them shrinking with every passing hour. Ethan felt it, an energy, quiet but charged, something old awakening beneath years of restraint. He told himself it was nostalgia. Friendship. But when Marcus's hand brushed his while reaching for the wine, Ethan's breath caught. Neither of them spoke. The air thickened, not with awkwardness, but with recognition. The kind that comes when something long buried shifts underfoot. Ethan stood to clear the glasses. "You staying in town long?" His voice was too steady. "Few weeks," Marcus said, watching him. "Maybe longer. I've missed this. Us." Ethan's back was turned, but he could feel Marcus's eyes on him, steady, searching. He took longer than necessary to rinse the glasses, his reflection in the kitchen window faint and uncertain. When he turned around, Marcus was still looking at him, a faint, unreadable smile on his face. "You've changed too, Ethan," Marcus said quietly. "You used to talk about dreams. Now you talk about balance." Ethan leaned against the counter. "Dreams are expensive. Balance costs less." Marcus rose from the couch, walked closer, and stopped a few feet away. "Still, some things are worth the cost." The sentence hung there. Ethan didn't answer. The sound of the clock ticking in the next room filled the silence between them. When Marcus finally left, the door clicked shut softly, leaving behind the scent of his cologne and an ache Ethan didn't want to name that he wandered through the house afterward, aimless, restless. In the dim hallway mirror, he caught his own reflection, eyes wide, uncertain. For the first time in years, he looked alive. The next morning, the text came again. Forgot my jacket. Mind if I drop by later? Ethan typed sure before he could think twice. Marcus arrived that afternoon, sunlight spilling in through the kitchen window. He wore the same easy smile, though something in his gaze was heavier now. They found themselves fixing small things around the house, tightening a loose shelf, changing a flickering bulb. It was ordinary work, yet every movement between them felt deliberate. As they worked side by side, Ethan noticed how close their hands came when passing tools, how easily laughter returned between them. Every smile lingered too long. Every glance said more than words dared to. After they finished, they sat on the back porch, the air warm and still. Marcus leaned back in the chair, eyes half closed. Feels like we never lost touch, he said. Maybe we didn't, Ethan replied softly. Marcus turned to him. You ever wonder how life might have been different? Ethan met his gaze. All the time. There was a long pause. Marcus nodded slowly. Then maybe it's not too late to feel something real again. Ethan's heart stuttered. Marcus, I'm not asking for anything, Marcus said quickly, voice calm but low. Sometimes friendship becomes something else. You can fight it, but that doesn't mean it's not there. Ethan couldn't speak. The sound of wind in the trees filled the silence, soft and relentless. Marcus stood, brushing imaginary dust from his jeans. I should go. Ethan followed him to the door, the space between them taut with unspoken things. Marcus paused on the threshold, eyes meeting his one last time. Good night, Ethan, he said quietly. Good night. The door closed. The echo of it seemed louder than before. Ethan stood there, motionless, his pulse thrumming in his ears. Outside, the evening sky deepened to the color of bruised gold. He didn't know what frightened him more, the idea that Marcus had crossed a line, or that part of him wanted to follow. That he turned off the lights one by one, the house dimming into silence. Yet somewhere inside that quiet, something had awakened, something that would not easily sleep again. For the next few days, Ryan and I moved through the apartment like actors performing a scene we hadn't rehearsed. Nothing seemed wrong on the surface. He made his usual protein shakes, I sat behind my laptop, but there was an undercurrent between us now, something unspoken that hummed beneath every word. When our eyes met, it was too quick. When they didn't, it felt intentional. That I kept telling myself it had been harmless, just a friendly gesture. But the memory of his hands on my shoulders wouldn't fade. It lived in the quiet moments, in the rhythm of rain against the glass, in the way I couldn't sleep without thinking of that night. Mark's messages came daily, each one shorter, colder. We'd been together for years, but lately, our conversations had turned into exchanges of updates, not affection. Still, seeing his name light up my screen brought a stab of guilt every time. One evening, I came home late from work. The apartment smelled faintly of cologne and something citrus. Ryan was on the couch, watching a movie. His hair was still damp from the shower, his shirt clinging slightly to his chest. I hesitated in the doorway, unsure if I should say anything or just retreat to my room. You're late, he said, glancing at me with a small smile. Rough day. Always, I muttered, setting down my bag. He paused the movie. You want to talk about it? Not really. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. But you look like you could use something to take your mind off it. I frowned. Like what? He gestured to the empty spot on the couch. A bad movie and worse company. Despite myself, I smiled. Depends on how bad the movie is. Terrible, he said. You'll hate it. I joined him. For the first half hour, we didn't speak. The movie flickered across the room in shades of blue and gold, and the quiet between us grew easier. Somewhere between scenes, Ryan reached for the bowl of popcorn between us, his arm brushing against mine. I froze for a moment, then relaxed, pretending not to notice. But the contact stayed alive on my skin long after. When the credits rolled, neither of us moved. The screen's light painted his face in soft contrast. He turned to me, eyes steady. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Did I make things weird? That night with the massage?" I inhaled slowly, the words caught somewhere in my chest. "No. You didn't. I just haven't stopped thinking about it." He nodded, almost as if he'd expected that. "Me neither." The honesty of it unsettled me. "Ryan, I'm still with Mark. Things aren't great, but we're trying." "I know," he said quietly. "You talk about him like someone you're trying to convince yourself you still love." The words hit harder than I wanted them to. I looked away. "That's not fair." "Maybe not. But it's true, isn't it?" Silence stretched between us. The air felt heavy again, just like that night, but now there was no rain, no excuses. "I'm not trying to mess anything up," Ryan said, softer now. Sometimes I think you're lonelier than you admit." He was right. I'd been lonely for months, but I didn't want him to see it. I stood up, trying to end the conversation before it went somewhere it shouldn't. "I should get some sleep." But when I turned to leave, he reached out, fingers wrapping gently around my wrist. I froze. The touch wasn't forceful, it was careful, hesitant. "Ethan," he said, "if I'm out of line, just tell me." I should have. I should have pulled away and gone to my room, closed the door, and put distance where there needed to be boundaries. But instead, I stood there, caught between what I felt and what I knew was right. That I turned back, and for a moment, neither of us said a word. The quiet was louder than any confession. His eyes held mine with a softness I hadn't seen in a long time, not desire, not pity, just understanding. When he leaned closer, I didn't move. The space between us disappeared slowly, as if both of us were waiting for the other to stop it. The kiss, when it came, was brief, uncertain, almost apologetic. But it was enough that I pulled back first, my heart pounding. "This isn't, I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry." But he didn't look sorry, and neither did I. We sat there in silence for a long while, the room dim except for the TV's glow. I could feel my thoughts unraveling, the pieces of my life rearranging into something I didn't recognize. Mark's face flashed in my mind, his voice, his familiar touch, and the weight of what I'd just done sank in like cold water. Ryan stood, running a hand through his hair. "We should forget this happened," he said, though his tone didn't sound convinced. "Yeah," I replied, though I knew forgetting was impossible. He turned off the TV, and the room went dark. I lingered for a moment, then went to my room, closing the door softly behind me. I leaned against it, breathing shallowly. That night, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the moment, his hand on my wrist, the warmth of his lips, the look in his eyes that told me this wasn't something either of us could easily undo. By morning, the air between us had shifted again. He acted normal, too normal. We talked about errands, groceries, meaningless things. It was easier that way, but the tension didn't disappear, it deepened. Every shared glance lingered a beat too long, every accidental touch felt deliberate. I could feel it pulling me in, and I hated that I didn't resist harder. That evening, a storm rolled in. The power flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the apartment into darkness. Ryan found candles in the drawer, their soft light throwing gold across his face. "Looks like movie night's cancelled," he said, setting one on the coffee table. I tried to laugh, but it came out thin. "Guess so." He poured 2 glasses of wine, where he'd found it, I didn't ask, and handed one to me. "To surviving bad weather," he said with a grin. "To bad decisions," I murmured before I could stop myself. He paused, then laughed quietly. "Maybe those too." We sat there, the candlelight flickering between us. The storm outside matched the rhythm in my chest, uneven, restless. When he looked at me again, I saw the same question in his eyes as before. Only this time, neither of us hesitated. The moment stretched, then collapsed. The world outside faded until there was only the sound of rain, the warmth of skin, and the quiet inevitability of what we both knew was coming. Afterward, the silence returned, but it wasn't the same. It was heavier now, filled with the echo of choices we couldn't take back. That I sat there, staring at the candle's dying flame, the weight of guilt already sinking in. Ryan reached for my hand, his voice barely a whisper. "Ethan, what happens now?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. The only thing I did know was that nothing in that apartment would ever feel simple again. The morning after the storm was unnervingly still. The mountains wore a fresh layer of mist, and the air outside the cabin smelled clean, too clean, as though the night before had been washed away. Ethan woke to silence, broken only by the slow crackle of new firewood and the faint sound of water dripping from the roof. His head felt heavy, not from wine, but from everything that had gone unsaid. Caleb stood by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. His expression was unreadable, calm, almost casual, but something beneath it had changed. His voice when he spoke was soft, careful. "You sleep at all?" Ethan shook his head. "Barely." Caleb handed him a mug. "Yeah. Me neither." They sat across from each other, separated by the narrow table that suddenly felt like a chasm. The quiet wasn't comfortable this time. It was thick, weighted with what they hadn't done but almost had. Ethan stared into his cup, the rising steam blurring his reflection. He wanted to say something, apologize, explain, retreat, but no words fit. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "We should probably head back before the roads ice over." Ethan nodded, grateful for the practicality of the statement. "Yeah. Let's do that." They packed in silence. Every small sound, the zip of a bag, the creak of the floorboards, the closing of drawers, felt exaggerated, like punctuation in a conversation neither wanted to finish. When Caleb brushed past him to grab his jacket, Ethan's heart jumped despite himself. The nearness hurt more than the distance ever could. Before leaving, Ethan stepped outside for air. The sky was pale, the valley below hidden under slow-moving fog. He closed his eyes, letting the cold bite at his skin. He told himself this would fade, that time and reason would erase the sharpness of what had almost happened. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't. Some moments refused to dissolve. Caleb came out behind him. "You ready?" Ethan nodded without turning around. "Yeah." The drive down the mountain was quiet. The winding roads felt endless, and each curve brought a new kind of tension, the kind that comes from knowing silence is safer than truth. Caleb focused on the road, his jaw tight, knuckles pale against the steering wheel. Ethan watched the landscape blur past, trees melting into shades of gray and green. He wanted to say something that could make the air lighter, but everything that came to mind felt dishonest. Halfway down, Caleb finally spoke. "You don't have to hate me for last night." Ethan turned to him. "I don't." Caleb's eyes stayed on the road. "Then what do you feel?" Ethan exhaled slowly. "Confused. Guilty. Maybe both." "About me?" "About everything." Caleb gave a faint nod, almost to himself. "I didn't plan it, you know." "I know." Ethan paused. "That doesn't make it easier." They drove the rest of the way in silence. By the time they reached the highway, the sun had climbed above the trees, melting what little snow remained. The world looked ordinary again, and that felt like a lie. When Caleb dropped him off at his apartment, he didn't kill the engine. Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt but didn't move to leave. For a long moment, they sat in stillness. Caleb broke it first. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "You too." He stepped out, closed the door, and stood on the curb as the truck pulled away. The sound of its tires faded into city noise until it was gone entirely. For the first time in days, Ethan felt utterly alone. Inside, Ryan was home early. He looked up from the couch, smiling with that easy familiarity Ethan had always found comforting. "Hey, you're back sooner than I thought. How was it?" Ethan managed a smile. "Peaceful." Ryan stood, stretching, then crossed over to hug him. "You needed it." Ethan let himself be held, but it felt strange, like fitting into a shape that no longer matched perfectly. Ryan smelled like coffee and cedar soap, the same as always. Nothing had changed here, and that was the problem. As the evening went on, Ryan talked about work, about a project deadline, about weekend plans. Ethan listened, nodding at the right moments, pretending everything was fine. But part of him still lingered in that cabin, by the fire, in the sound of rain, in Caleb's voice whispering truths neither could bear to hold. Later that night, while Ryan slept, Ethan sat by the window with his phone. One unread message glowed on the screen. "Caleb, I didn't plan it. But I don't regret feeling something real." Ethan's thumb hovered over the delete button. He didn't reply. Instead, he locked the screen and set the phone face down. But the words stayed, echoing like a heartbeat. He stared out at the city lights scattered across the dark. It was strange how easily life resumed, how routine could disguise turmoil. Yet inside, a quiet storm still moved. Guilt pressed at him, but beneath it lay something harder to name, a longing not for what happened, but for what it revealed. He wondered what it said about him, that a single weekend could shake years of certainty. That a glance, a touch, a near mistake could make him question what he thought he knew about love and loyalty. By midnight, the room had gone completely still. Ryan shifted in his sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Ethan watched him, the faint rise and fall of his chest, the trust in his unguarded face. He wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance between them, but couldn't. The space felt sacred now, something he wasn't sure he had the right to cross. When dawn approached, pale and thin, Ethan still hadn't slept. He went to the kitchen, made coffee, and stood by the window as the first light touched the skyline. His reflection looked older, quieter, changed in ways no one would notice. He thought of the mountains, of how they seemed eternal from afar, but up close, every surface told a story of erosion, of weather, of time reshaping even the strongest stone. Maybe people weren't so different. Caleb would fade, he told himself. The memory would dull, the guilt would soften. But part of him knew better. Some stories don't end, they just become quieter versions of themselves, hidden in the folds of ordinary life. Ethan took a slow breath and whispered to the empty room, "The mountains keep secrets." Then, almost to himself, softer still, "So do I." He set the mug down, straightened his posture, and turned toward the day waiting for him, but as the sunlight broke across the room, he couldn't quite shake the feeling that something inside him had shifted for good, and that the silence he carried from that cabin would follow him long after everything else had been forgotten.